It's your boy Copy Kid back with another episode of The Observation. It's episode 13. Today we got an interesting one. A 1956 high school exchange student debate on prejudice. Looks like we got student representatives from Ethiopia. That's the motherland, shout out. Nigeria, Ghana, South Africa. And I think before we hop in, I'm just gonna conjecture on what's probably going on in 1956. So the Civil Rights Act in America is not till 65, end of 64. And from what we know, a lot of the civil rights movements, for instance, the Black Panthers, were inspired by a lot of the decolonization efforts going on in Africa at the time. Africa is also a very, very colonized country. I don't think most countries gain their independence until the mid 60s, maybe even a little bit later than that. So, I mean, the tensions here in this video, especially amongst high school kids, which, the civil rights movements are always young people. Like, even in America, it's people from the ages of 25 and under that typically have the energy and drive a lot of the boots on the ground stuff. So to keep that in mind, these guys are probably pretty, it's so recent for them, and since they're so young, the zeal in their hearts is probably pretty heavy, if I had to guess, if I'm just trying to dissect the mental state of these high schoolers. And they're living in it, so most definitely their tensions are probably higher than they are now today. And in the age of Twitter and social media and all these things and constant just rapid news cycles, it seems like we're more divided. But even so, we're still a lot better off than some of the countries and people groups that were being oppressed and colonized back then. I think another thing to add is that if these people are in the U.S., this debate is being hosted in the U.S. These students can speak English. What we know, we can probably assume that they're in their own countries. They're probably coming from a upper middle class. They're probably coming from an elite, maybe not elite financial, family background, but definitely above average family background. I would assume, maybe that's a wrong assumption, but if they can speak English, especially in the mid 50s, that's a pretty strong indicator. So even within countries, prejudice aside between different skin colors, even in, for example, the country of Ethiopia, there's prejudice amongst different people groups that look alike. They're phenotypically the same for the most part, well, at least from a skin color standpoint. So I say all that to just kind of lay the ground as far as, when you read a book, you read the author because it gives you context. So when you hear someone speak, I think it's also good to know have some thoughts on where the speaker might be coming from. And granted, I'm making an assumption, so grain of salt with that one, but I think some of them are pretty fair assumptions. But nevertheless, I think this will be an interesting one, just to peek into the minds of a high schooler from the 50s. Like, that's going to be interesting. But without further ado, let's jump right in.
Discussion on the roots of prejudice. All four participants in today's discussion are high school students from Africa. Let me introduce them to you now. First, from the Gold Coast is 18-year-old Alfred Bannerman. We call him Nini. It all started, Nini tells us, when he was born. He looked like a little old man. And Nini is a term of respect for an old man. We still call him Nini, and he considers it a term of respect. From Nigeria, Mohamedou Liman, 18 years old. From the Union of South Africa, Dix Lobjer. Dix, well, you should see him do the rock and roll. From Ethiopia, 17-year-old Nabiet Tafari. It was Nabiat's suggestion that we start this discussion with a prayer in case there should be violence later. What you heard was Nabiat from Ethiopia giving a prayer in the Ge'ez language. He's a Copt by religion, Amhara by race, Hebrew in origin, and an African since he's been to America. How should we start this discussion on prejudice? Would it be unfair to ask each of you what your own prejudices are? How about you, Nabi?
Actually, I'm prejudiced against the Italians, and I have been prejudiced against the Mohammedans. Since I arrived here, I have developed some new prejudices, and I never felt that I was a Negro till I came to this country.
Why?
Because my tutor in the monastery told me that I was not a Negro, but I was a sunburned Hebrew.
You mentioned that you have prejudices against Mohammedans. I am a Mohammedan, and I have prejudices against Christians, too, in southern Nigeria.
Look, you said you have prejudices against Christians in southern Nigeria. Is that particularly because they are Christians? I'm a Christian myself, but I have no prejudice against Mohammedans. I rather prejudice against whites.
But why have you got prejudice against the whites in the Gold Coast?
I think it's a sort of this kind. At first, I was not prejudiced against whites anyway. I was prejudiced against fellow Africans because I had some opportunities which some of the Africans didn't get. I was brought up in a city. I lived the Western way. I dressed the Western style, and I did everything Western. And so I was looking down upon fellow Africans who live in the villages in the rural areas. As I
Hey, one of my assumptions was right, because you see, he's aware of it, man. Like, he's recognizing the social class and its impact on his viewpoint. So, yeah.
I started getting some political ideas. Especially, I'm very much interested in the problem in South Africa. We hear quite often about how the blacks are treated there, how everything goes on there. And for instance, everybody knows that we get good friendship and peace in the world through games like the Olympic Games and those kinds of games. But everybody knows that the team from the Union of South Africa has not got a single African, which means the people in South Africa think of themselves as superior beings. And this thing gives me more ideas just to be prejudiced and discriminate against the whites. And so I'd like you to explain to me some of the policies of the apartheid system and the basic idea to the logical conclusion.
Well, in South Africa, one must realize this fact, overseas people especially, and that is that this is the first case in history that a white nation has settled itself in a black country. In the whole of Africa, there are 190 million Africans, 190 million Negroes.
Yes, yes.
And in Southern Africa, there are almost 3 million white people. That means less than 3%. Now, in South Africa itself, the blacks outnumber the whites there by 4-1. In the States here, they outnumber the white people outnumber the Negroes 8-1. For that reason, and for the reason, and for this fact, that one cannot ever draw a parallel line between the Negroes in South Africa and the Negroes in the States. The Negroes in the States are far above the Negroes in South Africa as far as education and civilization goes. Now, the government's policy of apartheid, that policy, the guiding principle of this policy is to help the non-whites in South Africa to self-realization in their own territories and within their own communities so that they can govern themselves. Gradually, they'll be giving more and more power to govern themselves. Now, that's what the guiding principle is, and that's what the white man in South Africa is doing.
Yeah, let me make this point clear. You say they want the Africans to develop themselves. And so will you allow the Africans to get their own governments and their own representations? Or will you like to give them the rules and the laws by yourselves?
No,
we force them and do everything.
We're not going to force them to do anything.
No, the point is, I know that in South Africa you have a government, and there is not a single African in the government. There are 9 million Africans as against 2 million whites. Why is it that there is not a single African in the government of South Africa?
Well, there are 9 representatives for the...
But I mean, how can 9 Englishmen or 9 Europeans represent 9 million Africans? How can they know their problems and their ideas? These people are Africans. You believe in separateness. The Africans separate and the whites separate. Well, how then can it happen that you get whites representing Africans and ideas since they are separate?
I don't think that is fair either. Since the people in the House of Representatives, do you call it?
That's right.
They are supported by the taxes paid by the natives, aren't they?
No, just a minute. There, you've gone altogether wrong. If South Africa was to subsist on the taxes that the Bantu in South Africa pay, then South Africa would drop just like that.
Then,
Well,
As
Okay.
on
the
what
point is-
do they support? What supports them?
what?
The House of Representatives, or the people in the government, the officials?
That's the 2.5 million white people that are supporting themselves and the overwhelming black population. 12 million black people. It's them. It's those 2.5 million to 3 million white people that are supporting the lot.
Could you
And-
just explain how they are able to support themselves and how they are able to support?
You
all
mean the
these
white
people?
people's part?
Yeah, and how they are able to conduct this development without the assistance of the natives?
Because they've got the Western idea of working, and they've developed that country.
Oh, I see. They've developed that country through the Africans working. I know that the whites in South Africa went down there because of wealth. It was through the gold rush and all those things that happened that, I mean, we got white men in South Africa. And so they went down there purposely to use the Africans as tools for their own benefit. Isn't that?
When the white
Just to
men
rule
went
them.
down there,
Uh-huh.
they never even knew a black man existed down there.
I see.
When the white man landed at the bottom of the Cape in 1652, the black people in South Africa hadn't even moved over the northern boundary of the Union of South Africa.
Yes. I know these people would like to get these sociological ideas just to get around the question. So far as I know, the people in South Africa are a nomadic tribe by career or by profession. They are herdsmen who move with their cattle all around the belt and all those
Nowadays-
places. Nowadays, even in the
Oh, no.
olden days.
No.
Okay. It might happen that they were living down south, but because of their profession, they happened to live up north. Because in those days, there were warring tribes which were waging wars against each other. And so you cannot say that the land is yours. Everybody knows that Africa is for Africans. And when we think of Africans, we think of blacks. That's how I know. Well,
Look here, just to
And
give
you
you
are
a
using
short...
the policy, and you are using the policy of aggressors that the land, the earth belongs to everybody, and the one that is powerful rules the part of the world which is owned by the others. That's the policy that aggressors use.
You know who are the aggressors? It's the African National Congress in Africa. They are the aggressors.
No, how can there be?
If the Africans in Africa would stop being so militant and would rather get down and help and build up South Africa and build up Africa, the problem would cease almost immediately.
okay, let me ask you this thing. You said if they can come down and help, the problem will cease.
Mhm.
The point is, how can they help if you get 9 million Africans and 3 million Europeans, and you get only 9 Europeans representing the interests of these Africans? Do you believe, let me ask you this personal question, do you believe, according to your apartheid policy, in getting 2 South Africas, one South Africa for the Africans and one South Africa for this thing, with 2 different colonial policies and 2 different foreign policies? If you
No.
don't, give me the
Well,
answer.
I wouldn't be able to give you the definite answer right now.
Why?
Suppose-
You believe in separateness. And why don't you believe in getting the Africans separate, having their own government and
Look, yeah,
everything,
the
thereby creating 2 union of South Africas? That's the point. But that, if, so far as you believe in apartheid, it means you believe in separateness. Then keep the Africans separate with their own governments, with their own money, with their own everything, and keep the white separate.
Excuse me, I'll just
Because-
come in there.
Okay.
He said that if Africans would just calm down and then cooperate with them, the land will achieve peacefulness. Right. Do you mean that the Africans are the people who are really the aggressors against you? You are not really aggressive towards Africans. I mean,
Of course not. The general attitude in South Africa, and I come from a country, I know, every summer that we have, every holiday at least that I have, I go and spend on the farms, and I live amongst these natives. I really get to know what they look and what they are
Then
like.
what do- what-
and the
what-
general,
what-
general attitude of the white people in South Africa is sympathetic towards the black people. They regard themselves as the trustees of the
I mean,
black people.
why shouldn't they be sympathetic? The point is, I always stress this fact that there are 9 million Africans and 3 million whites.
Exactly. So
I mean, if you come to South Africa, there are only 43 Africans with university degrees who are graduates. If you come to the Gold Coast, you have thousands of them. Gold Coast is a black colony, just like South Africa. But we have been able to develop everything, which shows the capability of the African to do anything itself. But we have been able to get all these ideas through the mixture of Western ideas. Actually, we couldn't develop on our own, until we got British help. And since we got the help, we have been able to do everything ourselves. If you go down to South Africa and help the Africans with your ideas, getting, free mixture of ideas, everything will be okay. But the point is, you use the Africans as tools. You tell them that don't be in this city after 9 o'clock, don't wear this thing, don't do this thing, don't go to America, and the Africans don't go any part apart. Anywhere at all outside the South African Union.
You know, the white people in South Africa aren't allowed in the black areas either after dark.
It's because you created this situation. Why don't get free mixture? You look down on the Africans. That's the point. Am I quite clear? Because you said you believe in separateness, and I want you to come down to this point. You have not answered my question as yet.
Just let me interfere. What's the fundamental cause of all this discrimination in South Africa? The one fundamental cause.
Firstly, because the Bantu in South Africa is not as educated and as highly civilized.
And therefore?
Yes.
And therefore
we've got to live with them together in that land. Remember that?
Mm-hmm. You mean
you people want us to give them equal franchise rights. If we give them equal franchise rights within hardly any time whatsoever, the white man in South Africa will have absolutely no say in anything.
But you have been
in this case, you don't have any choice. Suppose now you think that if the society of the white and the society of the blacks is mixed, it will be quite dangerous for you because these people are not as civilized as the white. Exactly. Suppose these people are kept in separation, and you educate them, and the government, I think, believes within the 20 years they will be of the same standard as the white. And this means that you are giving them help mechanically, and unless you mix with them, if they are as good as you, then they will say, get away, who cares for you? Yeah. You must realize the fact that they will do so because you were not exchanging ideas for developing these people in terms of friendship.
But that's exactly what we're doing.
No.
The black man and the white man in South Africa are working together.
No.
There's constant contact between the ministers and the Bantu.
No, but
yes.
How can 9 white men get the interest of 9 million Africans? That's the point. If you get the Africans there in the government themselves,
it's not just
they can be able.
It's not just 9 men, and it's not the 9 million black people aren't just sitting there and waiting for the government to do something for them. They governing themselves. They got local governments already.
Yes.
And they're getting more and more local government.
Answer this question for me. I was asking you a personal question, if you don't mind. The point is, you believe in separateness.
Yes.
You believe that if you keep the Africans separate, entirely separate, and the whites entirely separate, you can be able to live in South Africa?
Yeah. You mustn't take this idea of separateness or apartheid too literal. It doesn't mean that's fenced around and blacks live there and whites live there.
That's how it is.
Oh, no,
if you go to South Africa, tell me this thing. You come near Johannesburg. Africans are not allowed to be in Johannesburg after 9 o'clock. Am I quite clear? Is it true?
No, it's not.
Is it not true?
In Johannesburg, after dark,
yes,
it's just those hooligans that walk around there. After dark, any self-respecting Bantu or white person won't venture out of doors.
Okay. Come to this point.
If you go to the railway station, are not the same as you think of them. There may be the minority.
I've been in contact with them all the time since I've grown up. I know what they're like.
But how far does the government
city.
make use of those who are educated, for example?
They're going back to help educate and uplift their people.
No, they are not going back. The point is you try to educate these Africans to go back and help their people.
Exactly.
And that is where I tell you that there are only 43 Africans with university degrees. How can these 43 Africans go back with their Western ways and Western everything to this African society and help the people? The people will not understand them because you are turning back to primitivism in South Africa. And so when these people go down to the Africans don't, as it were, get them nicely.
You're always talking about you can't learn to swim unless you get into the water.
Yeah.
Well, you can't start educating them unless you send those that are educated back to
you ought to start educating them, for the 300 years that, South Africa has existed. We have been in the Gold Coast with Western contact for only 100 years. But if you come to the Gold Coast now, we are able to do everything ourselves. We are, at present, I'm sitting down equally with you.
You can't, it's absolutely unrealistic and stupid to compare South Africa with the Gold Coast.
Yes.
There's absolutely no comparison
No,
whatsoever.
but basically we are all Africans.
Just let me finish.
Oh, no.
In South Africa, at least in the Gold Coast, there has never been enough white men there to constitute a nationhood.
Yeah.
If the Gold Coasters at any time wanted to drive him out, and they drove him out, those white men have got England for their homeland. We in South Africa
the only thing I know is,
homeland,
according to the partition of Africa and the scramble for Africa in 1884, all the white men came to Africa and they settled at the places which suit them best, according to health. If you go to South Africa, the climate is Mediterranean in certain places, so you see white men there. If you go to East Africa, it is tropical. But because of the highlands, I mean, it's relatively cooler. And so you see white men there. That's why you get the mama in East Africa. In the Gold Coast, it is jungle, mosquitoes and everything. And so the white men don't like to live in the Gold Coast. That's natural.
And Nini, and excuse me, Navy, and Dix, I want to ask you this. Dix just said that there weren't enough white men in the Gold Coast. Would your point of view be that believing in separateness, you've kept yourself so separated from the white men in the Gold Coast that maybe your standard of living has...
No, ma'am. We were just keeping, I mean, side by side with them. I tell you at first that if you come to the Gold Coast, through the contact with the whites, we have been able to develop. We can never develop on our own. That's the point. But we got Western ways and Western ideas and Western help. That's why we are, I mean, as equal to the whites now.
I suppose it's a different case with countries on West Africa. You see, we in West Africa, we were brought under the British rule, but you can't compare that with the South Africa, because the white went there to live and not to bring these people to a higher standard of living and to educate them and bring and allow them to realize the full significance of civilization.
The Africans, they are the citizens. If they are citizens, why deny them these rights?
We're not denying them the rights.
Let me ask
No.
Mohamedou another question. You said at the beginning that you were Mohammedan, that Nini was Christian, that you had some prejudices against Christians.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a fairly frank question. Do you have any sense that Nini from the Gold Coast is less purely African than you are?
Yeah, I often feel that.
Why?
You see, we in Nigeria, and now part of Nigeria, northern Nigeria, we often feel that Africa is for Muslims, not for Christians. It's meant for Muslims. And our social life is entirely different from the Western ways. We are totally opposed to it because it sort of try to disassociate our religious principles.
We were talking a moment ago about discrimination between white and black. Suppose Nini comes to visit you in Nigeria. Would he be discriminated against in any way?
I suppose so, simply because, for one reason. You see, we eat in a bowl. We in my home, we put a big bowl down, and you have about 3 or 4 people putting their hands all at the same time into the bowl.
There is
And,
element of competition.
And you see, we don't allow Christians to interfere. We don't allow Christians to put their hands inside. You see, it's one of our religious doctrines. We don't allow, we're not supposed to eat with Christians in the same bowl unless we're obligated to. And so that's one of the things which we...
On this question of religion, I'd like to ask you one more thing. I've heard it said recently that Islam is gaining rapidly in Africa and Christian influence is declining. Is that true?
I wouldn't say definitely it is not true, but to some extent it is. You see, there are two sides to it. We have the Ahmadiyya movement in Nigeria. They come from Pakistan, and I think it originated about 1885. I don't know.
I wonder if Nini would agree with you that Christianity is on the way.
I agree with him. The point is, Muslim teaches purely African, principles. That's the case. They had the Mohammedan influence in Africa, around about West Africa, in about 1,000 years ago. About some few centuries ago. But Christianity came down in Africa about 200 years ago. And through Christian influence, we are able to adopt Western ways of life and Western everything. And so more people like to adopt Christianity, whereby they try to become Western. Because most of the missionaries who come down there are Americans or Englishmen. And people like to follow the style because of singing and everything, because African likes music. And so
but you wouldn't say a person joins a religion simply because he finds it very easy or because he finds that he can conform his social customs to it.
No.
You follow it because you understand that it is a true religion and your spiritual understandings agree with it.
No, what I'm trying to say is, I'm not saying that Western ideas are best to the Africans. I believe in African getting everything African. But the point is, we know, and everybody knows, that if you get some things African, they are sometimes bad. So I believe in getting Western ideas, And through Christianity, we are able to teach the people decent ways of life and different everything. For instance, Mohammedans will not eat with a Christian, which is bad. It doesn't bring peace to the world. But through Christianity, we are able to teach pure love and love for everything.
But
and so more Africans like
haven't
to...
you
I
heard me?
think you have
I
a
said if you...
conception of Christianity. There are Orthodox Christians who don't allow to mix with Mohammedans. For example, I belong to a real Orthodox Christian religion known as the Copts. And there it says that its origin, of course, from Judaism also. It says that the animal must be properly slaughtered before you eat it. And if a Mohammedan has already slaughtered a sheep or a cow, for example, I will not eat with him.
I'm sure there are infinite prejudices in your country alone between Amharas and Hebrews and Arabs. You do say your origin is Hebrew, do you
Yeah,
not?
my-
And most of the Ethiopians are. We could talk for
yeah.
ages on that, but there's another question I want very much to ask all of you. That is, what had you heard about race problems in America before you came? Is our problem greater or less than you thought?
I thought it was greater before I came. I mean, because of the nationalistic feelings in the Gold Coast, everybody is prejudiced against the whites because we want to get the best positions in the government. Apparently, we have it though, but I mean, in the olden days, we wanted to get them. And so we were always constant on the point to listen to some of these things which happen in America. About 70% of the news about America are concerning racial prejudice.
Is that true in the Gold Coast, Dix? How much news, American news,
You mean
is
in South
concerned?
Africa?
I'm sorry, in South Africa.
Well, very little. Except the case like the recent Supreme Court case comes up, then that receives attention in the South African newspapers. But we realize what the position is here in the States, and we got a problem much bigger than ours back home.
Was our problem greater than you thought it would be or less?
Oh, I think it's bigger than I thought it would be, because well, I imagined when I came over here that all the Negroes were as well educated as the white people, and well, that's not always the case, especially down south. And then I didn't expect to find them as concentrated in the south as they are.
Have any of you had any experiences with segregation here in this country?
Well, I've just got something quite insignificant. You know, people get to know that I'm a foreigner, and so they treat me differently. When I came at first, I tried to get an American haircut, appear in American clothes as best as possible and as much as possible, just for people to discriminate against me. And I've never had such an occasion. I've been trying to get it, but I mean, it seems as if I've been getting the best, actually.
Much friendliness.
Yes, ma'am.
How about you, Navy?
This is rather superficial, but I was living in one of the communities in New Jersey, which is a strictly white resident, and there I couldn't get a haircut for about 2 weeks because the white man don't know how to cut this type of hair. And one of the boys was joking to me that he said that the best engineers in the United States are working hard to design an instrument that will be of some use to cut this hair.
Well, that's not discrimination.
Well, this is another sort of discrimination because United States is a business country, and if they discourage their customers by means of types of hair, then they are defeating their own purpose.
I found a little bit of segregation, forms of segregation at any rate. And that is, well, I was speaking to residents in New Jersey, while they were teachers, and they told me that although it's officially prohibited by law, there are what they call gentlemen's agreements, whereby a Negro cannot obtain land or buy property in a white man's area. Then on the other hand, I found that on the whole, the Negroes are not as economically sound as the white men are. And then too, in a recent case where Negro and white schools have been integrated, the Negro teachers have lost their jobs.
See, let's come to this point. You said they are not economically sound as the white men. The point is, in America, for instance, if you get much education, you get better pay, better job. If you deny the Negro opportunities to go to college, how do you expect them to get better qualifications, to occupy the better jobs, and get better pay for the houses? That's the point. I'm now getting some of these facts from the papers. I every day read about the problem which is happening down in Alabama, and I see quite a lot of those things. Those are some of the experiences of segregation that I've seen in America now. Obviously, I can take back some of these ideas with me, but they are just insignificant. As I said at first, I've met with friendliness in America, but in certain aspects too, I see some of these things, you see. That's the point. Think of the education first. I believe in education.
Do you know something? In South Africa, last year, we spent $42 million on educating the Bantu there, and 3/4 of that was paid by the white people. 40% of the Bantu school children are going to school, and the literacy rate in the Union of South Africa now amongst the Bantu is 27.7, and within the next 20 years, it'll be 100% literacy.
Why is it that then? Why is it that, that you have not got a delegate who is African for the whole year that we have been operating this forum? I'm sure that next year a white man is going to come here as a delegate for the Union of South Africa, though there are 9 million South Africans who are Africans. So don't think of this thing as something like literacy. I know that the literacy rate in South Africa is 16%. But
No,
the
it's
27%. But the
Much
point is,
better.
the Africans just get the elementary education in the African quarters, which is fit for nothing but unskilled labor.
To sum up a little bit, Nini, what's the best thing your government can do, the most significant thing to help attack this problem?
At present, we are not yet fully self-government. We do everything ourselves in the government. But the last point is defense and external affairs. Great Britain is controlling this. And the moment we become independent, we can prove to the outside world that the African can rule himself and the black can govern himself. And so
What
I
would you
think
say
that's
for
the
your
only
government,
thing.
Dick?
The government must definitely apply this policy of apartheid more firmly and more thoroughly and apply it and carry it out more rapidly than it's done in the future.
There's a final question I'd like to ask you. Since the population of the world, the percentage between white and non-white is roughly what it is here, I'm sure Dix and I are wondering when the 3/4 of the human race that is not white gets political power. What are you going to do to the whites? Segregate them?
Well, if we practice segregation, then we will be as bad as the white. So what we will do is we'll allow them to mix with us, and in the meantime unite ourselves like that we did in the Bandung conference.
Well, listen to me. When Mr. Thurgood Marshall, the attorney to Miss Lucy, when he came down from Alabama to New York, this is what he said. He said that sometimes Negro organizations and individual Negroes, through their help to save the white man, so become a little bit tired. And so I think probably that's our mission.
To save the white man's
yes,
soul.
just to save the white man's soul.
Thank you, Nini. I'm sorry that's all the time we have. Thank you all. Next week, we'll continue the discussion.
That was a packed video. Yeah, man. I think a lot of good points, a lot of good arguments made. I think I'm gonna take my like conclusion a different route. It's like this guy was 18. So they're still in high school. That's the max age. So for the white guy and for the black guys, they're probably not going to have kids for another 6 years. So, you know, this, 64? Probably 60s, 70s is when they start having kids. That means their kids are about 60. Okay? So we know that a kid will take after their parents. That's nature versus nurture. The conclusion is that both heavily impact depending on how involved the parent is and depending on what the nature of the environment that person is. But nevertheless, if their kids are roughly 60s, max 70s, in that range, and they're well off, if you take 10 of these Ninis, and I forget the white guy's name, but if you multiply, because he's, his mind state and his conscience, all of them, probably is, there's a lot of other people with that mind state. So the population, the next generation of population was raised with a lot of the same prejudices, mindsets as these gentlemen. They all admit they have their own prejudices. Those 60, 70-year-old people are now the current policymakers. Think about it. Those are the people who are currently holding positions of power in government. Like, that's a pretty common age. So how much of their mindset was really shifted from good or bad from what the mindset was here? Like, it's really hard to change a mindset in a generation. A brother in back in the day during the 60s said the revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be televised because you won't see it. It won't be on your TV. The revolution won't be televised because it's in your conscience. Until you change your mind, until you change your heart, you will never, the world around you will never be revolutionized from a policy and decision-making standpoint. It won't be transformed. And it's a similar kind of notion with the gospel. Your actions won't change until your heart does. You don't attain the riches of heaven by just, doing good deeds with a rotten heart. Just for the sake of it's like a transactional thing. I'm going to do this thing so I can get into heaven. That's a very transactional standpoint. It's not relational. So it's false. It's a false fruit. It's not true. So I think my underlying takeaway is, when it comes to socioeconomic revolutions, it's the same with a spiritual revolution. And because, we want to make the world a better place, but at the end of the day, the Bible tells us the world is dying. The world will return to dust, and what will remain will not be a fleshly form, So we can talk about starting revolutions from a socioeconomic standpoint, but the correlation between what it takes to, spark a revolution for the better of the people on a worldly standpoint is very similar to what it takes to transform yourself from a spiritual standpoint. And what came first? What came first, the chicken or the egg? What came first, the spirit or the flesh? So is the way that we spark socioeconomic change that occurs in our mind derived from even the nature of our world's formation. We came from dust. So I'm just trying to think chain of events or a chain of significance when it comes to the correlations of what it takes to transform a spiritual and a worldly pursuit. Why are they similar? Because they're interconnected in a way. But I think even beyond that, let's just say from a prejudice standpoint, what does the Bible say? I think in the Bible there's a lot of prejudice. The Jews don't like the Gentiles or the Samaritans and vice versa. These people groups don't like each other. The Egyptians, which was an African nation up to somewhere in the 20th dynasty, was an African nation. They oppressed the Jews, the Israelites. So a predominantly phenotypically black-looking nation oppressed an olive, lighter skin complexioned people. Granted, there's different mixing of genetics. But let me take a scripture from 1 John chapter 4, verses 20 and 21. If anyone says, I love God, and hates his brother, he is a liar. For he who does not love his brother whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has not seen. And this commandment we have from him: whoever loves God must also love his brother. So let's just take the fact that most of colonialism past the Islamic empires that colonized Africa in modern times from 18th 17th century on, it was mostly, at least in Africa, it was mostly Christian nations, right? So think about the policymakers, the heads of states, the heads of corporations. Much of these people were spreading their influence in partnership with the church and in partnership with the Christian faith. But we're told that there's a lot of people that will say, Lord, Lord, and they are unknown by God, as he says, because it's false. They're liars. Because if anyone says, I love God, but then hates his brother, he is a liar. So I don't think that takes away from the truth that lives in the Bible, because the Bible told us that there's a wheat and a tare. They grow amongst each other, and you can't tell the difference between the two. The body, the people in the body of Christ are the wheat that will be taken for the harvest, but the tares, it's a type of plant, live next to them, and they look identical. They grow identical. So you can't tell the difference except from the actions. You can't just say one nation under God, indivisible. And the structure of your country and the history of your country has never told that story. And the Bible also says, pay your debts. A lot of our infrastructure is indebted to very oppressed people groups. So there is a debt to be paid. And, a lot of those things I think are in God's hands, but hey, man, we're just called to love. But that doesn't just go for the people that are being oppressed to turn the other cheek. That goes for the people who have power to love. And let it be exemplified through the way they write laws and things of that nature. Separate but unequal is a lot of times the moral of the story, and Nini in this video brings it up good. Like the Gold Coast at this time, they're economically better off than the black people in South Africa, but they still don't control their defense branches of government, their external affairs, and the financial system. There's not equal representation. Love is not just an act of affection. Love is an act of sacrifice and fairness. If you love someone, you're fair to them. You're understanding of them. You want them to be equal with you. So the fact that there's not even proportionate representation, to me, is clearly something's wrong with the actions of these people. That's indicative of where their heart posture is at. So nevertheless, I think this was a really productive discussion and insightful. If you look at it then and then kind of extrapolate to what could be now, given what the population that they represent and the opinions of those populations, and then the kids who eventually grew up and now are still alive today, what were their opinions? What was their kind of behavior and worldview? If you had to categorize different worldviews, what's the percentage of how they view this one issue or another, one state of oppression or another, and what their viewpoints are and how you can fix it? Has that really changed? I'd argue not that much. In our last video, I talked about how history repeats itself. It really does. Because we don't remember. We forget. Even though it's recorded in history, we forget the significance of why and what it means in the context of today. People are wrapped up in their own lives. Politicians are trying to get rich. So, that's just my observation, man. Disagree, agree, whatever you want to do. It's just my observation. But I think I'm going to end it there. I appreciate if you made it this far in the video, for taking some time out of your day to tune in, and hope you found it informative. Hope you found it enriching. If you would, I would appreciate, any likes. If you're new, subscribe, turn on post notifications just so you can see new content as I post it. And if you, want to leave a comment, want to leave a thought, a discussion point, I'm happy to reply, good or bad, as long as you stay respectful, I'll stay respectful regardless. But with that said, it's been your boy Coffee Kid with another episode of The Observation, episode 13. Thanks again for tuning in if you made it this far. Have a great rest of your week and stay blessed, y'all.